The sprint retrospective is one of the most important activities for you to facilitate effectively as a Scrum Master. So to help you out, I'm going to share with you 5 simple but powerful techniques taken from this book right here. It's called The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision-Making, a really great read, and I would highly recommend it to all Scrum Masters out there. So you ready? Let's check it out. Firstly, the book recommends that there are 4 things that you want to focus on when you're facilitating. Firstly, encouraging full participation. You want to make sure that everyone feels that they've been heard and contributed. It's a really important attribute of teams where they feel they've got equal voice and no opinion is more important than another. So firstly, you want to encourage full participation at your sprint retrospectives. Secondly, promoting mutual understanding, making sure that everyone has the same understanding of what's involved and has been proposed. Thirdly, you want to foster inclusive solutions. So is everyone on board? Has everyone contributed to the discussion and the solution? And ensuring that nobody is being ignored. Fourth is to cultivate shared responsibility. So is everyone taking ownership of what has been decided? Now that all sounds good, but what happens is in your team, maybe you've got people who are more dominant than others, or others who are very vocal and verbal and talk too much, or some people who don't talk at all. So how do you deal with that? Again, I'm going to share with you 5 simple techniques from this book. The first being paraphrasing. So the first facilitation technique is paraphrasing, and it's very simple but powerful, and I'm sure you've all done it before. What is it? Well, it's basically just saying back to someone what they said to you and your team, but in your own words. For example, imagine at the sprint retrospective, somebody says, look, I think these retrospectives are a waste of time. We end up just saying the same thing again and again, and nothing gets done. Now, what I might say in response to that is I might say, oh, thank you. So what I'm hearing is you feel that these sprint retrospectives are not a good use of the team's time because we're not really taking action afterwards, or no changes are being made through having these sessions. Is that right? Now, what that does is it tells the other person that I've heard what they're saying. And that's really important because most people just want to make sure that their point is delivered and has been understood by others within the room. So then they're going to be more open to what you say or others say in response to that statement. Now, this technique of paraphrasing can also be very useful if you've got somebody who talks too much. I'm sure you've all met them before. They just keep on going on and on and on. And usually it's because they feel like they need to share all this information to, again, make their point heard. But what you can do is you can cut them short and say, hey, I think I understand what you're saying. Is it this, this, and this? And then they can say, oh, yes, that's what I meant. And they won't feel the need to continue rambling on. So first technique, paraphrasing. It's just about making sure that the other person feels heard. And you can do that by repeating to them in your own words what you felt they said. And that can be very helpful to facilitate an effective sprint retrospective. All right, let's go on to the second technique, which is called drawing people out. So the second technique is called drawing people out. And basically it's where you're going to paraphrase what the person says, but then follow up with an open-ended, non-directive question. So for example, let's say someone at the sprint retrospective says, hey, we're all feeling really stressed out. There is just way too much work to do. So firstly, we would paraphrase that, but then we're going to follow up with a non-directive question. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's tempting for us to ask directive questions after something like that comes up. So for example, we might say, is the stress mostly because of unrealistic sprint goals? Or do you think we need to improve how we estimate? Or maybe is management pushing too much work onto the team? Now, the problem there is we're leading the team towards our own interpretation of what might be the issue. So instead, what you want to do is follow up with a non-directive open-ended question. For example, you might say, can you tell us more about what's making the team feel stressed? Or what does too much work look like from your perspective? Or maybe you might say, how is this stress showing up in your day-to-day work? So what this does is it's going to allow them to draw their own conclusions, and as a Scrum Master, you'll get more insights that otherwise wouldn't have been heard. All right, so second technique, drawing people out, paraphrase what somebody says, and then ask an open-ended, non-directive question afterwards. Let's look at the third technique, which is called balancing. The third technique is called balancing, and that's where we're going to make sure that there's a balance of perspectives given at the sprint retrospective. So for example, sometimes you can have team members who are very strongly opinionated, and you want to make sure that you hear from others within the group to determine whether they feel the same way. So for example, imagine somebody says, I feel these sprint retrospectives are a waste of time. Now, of course, what we're going to do, like I said before, is we're going to paraphrase what they say, but then we might ask a balancing question. We might say, does anyone see things differently? Or is there another perspective that anyone wants to share? So basically what you're doing here is you're validating what the person is saying. You're saying you've heard their opinion and then opening it up to the rest of the group. Now that's really important because it broadens the discussion and we get other points of view, and we want to make sure that we don't assume that silence means agreement, because often it does not. It's just people haven't felt like they've had the chance to offer their opinion. Now this can have a positive effect on the team because it tells people that it's acceptable for people to speak their mind no matter what their opinions hold, but that you're going to facilitate the session to make sure everybody is heard. Okay, so that's the third technique of balancing. Let's move on to the fourth technique, which is helping people listen to one another. The fourth technique is helping people listen to each other. So basically what this involves is when a team member says something, you're then going to ask the group or another person within the team of their opinion. So for example, let's say I have a team member and her name is Naomi. And Naomi says, I think we should try limiting the team's work in progress so we don't get stretched across too many stories. Now imagine that the whole group nods and nobody builds upon it. So as a facilitator, what you can do is you can say, hey, Sue, how would Naomi's idea play out from where you sit? For example, in your role as QA, what impact would limiting WIP have on your work? So that's going to make sure that we hear from different perspectives and hear from others within the group. Another example might be where team members disagree with one another. So imagine I've got two team members, Alex and Sam disagrees with whatever Alex says. I might say, okay, well, what part of Alex's idea doesn't work for you? So what that does is it helps Sam be a little bit more specific and constructive in the response rather than just dismissing Alex's whole idea. Now, why is that important? Well, it helps promote a mutual understanding within the group, shifts the group focus from talking at each other to listening and building upon each other's ideas, and it allows them to question and challenge each other without upsetting other people. So it's a very powerful technique. All right, let's move on to our last facilitation technique, which is making space for a quiet person. So the last technique is making space for people who are quiet. To do this, you have to keep an eye on the body language of those who are quiet. That might indicate that they want to say something. We want to try and create the opportunity for them to speak, but without forcing them and making them feel uncomfortable. And then asking them, was there something that you wanted to mention, or how do you feel about that? And if necessary, you may need to hold other people off or say, hey, can you please let this person speak? So for example, I might notice one of my team members, Alex, has been nodding but hasn't spoken. And I might say, hey, Alex, I noticed you nodding during that point. Would you like to add your perspective to the conversation? Or another example might be the team having a debate around deployment issues. And I noticed Priya, who's a tester, hasn't spoken. And I might say, hey, Priya, we haven't heard from you yet. From your perspective in testing, what's been the biggest challenge with deployments? Now that invites her into the conversation with a role-specific angle, but doesn't put her on the spot. and make her feel uncomfortable. So why do you want to do this? Well, it helps those quiet members or slower thinkers engage in the conversation. Sometimes people think that their ideas aren't as good as others. And by inviting them into the conversation, it ensures they get heard, and it also tells that quiet person that their opinion is important and ensures that they participate. So a great facilitator makes space for these types of people, but without forcing them and making them feel uncomfortable. So there you have it, 5 facilitation techniques to help you with your next sprint retrospective. If you have other facilitation techniques that you like to use, please, I'd love to hear. Leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.